All right, Harrison Hines, CEO at Fleek. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm really looking forward to it. This is an area that I'm trying to learn a little bit more about. Edge computing has become clearly one of the hottest trends in cloud computing right now, with businesses trying to find reduced latency and improve user experiences by processing, I guess, closer to the source if at all possible. Um, Centralized exchanges have always been this way. Edge networks controlled by a single provider offer few benefits over existing cloud infrastructure, with expensive costs typically and some scalability issues as well as resilience problems. So that is the setup for what we're about to talk about. I first would love to hear a little bit more about your journey and what led you to starting the organization.
Sure. Basically, I got into the crypto space back in 2016. Um, Essentially, before I got into crypto, I was working on some equity crowdfunding stuff, um, and lived through like the Jobs Act and just some of the regulation around crowdfunding. Um, and And so once I saw Ethereum launch, I the first use like equity crowdfunding really never took off because the regulations around it sort of just prevented it from, I think, becoming what a lot of people thought it might become. So then when Ethereum launched, and like the first use case that was really taking off on Ethereum was these crowdfunding campaigns, essentially.
Good old
Um,
ICOs.
yeah, so that's where I got interested and thought, okay, this is kind of what crowdfunding should have been, but it's probably not going to be the Wild West forever. So I met Joe Lubin, who was in Brooklyn and building consensus, and obviously token sales and token sale infrastructure was a big just opportunity and an area that a lot of people were talking about. So I had joined consensus and started a project called Token Foundry, which was essentially like the tokenization arm of consensus, just trying to bring like better standards and help with some of the infrastructure and just software needed to like run these sales and help projects get through that process. Did that for about 2 years, and then sort of realized that I was way more interested in like the decentralizing the web narrative of the sort of crypto space more so than the decentralizing Wall Street narrative. And so that's where in 20 like late 2018 with a few people I had started Token Foundry with, we had left and started Fleek. And yeah, that was, I would say when we started, we didn't know exactly where we were going to fit in terms of helping along the decentralizing the web narrative. It was very nascent at the time. And so we kind of just played around with a few technologies that showed promise on that side of the ecosystem, played around with different protocols who had launched early in that, sort of decentralized web infrastructure side of the ecosystem, and just kind of learned a lot, saw how the ecosystem played out, and built a product in the meantime with Fleek so we could understand what users wanted or what they were using these decentralized web technologies for until we felt, we saw an opportunity and sort of where we could really add value in terms of, pushing that decentralizing the web narrative forward. And that's how we ended up with Fleek Network and building this sort of decentralized, edge optimized cloud platform.
Wow, so you were rubbing elbows with the people that originally started some of these concepts and ideas. Did you ever meet Vitalik by chance?
Yeah, a few times. Not that it was anything more than a handshake or a quick combo in an airport or things like that. But yeah, I love it. I love Vitalik and everything he's done for the space, and he's the GOAT. So
True.
yeah, big
No,
fan.
totally agree. It's funny to have this conversation with you because there's so many people that are so caught up in one element around, let's say, these decentralized networks like Ethereum, and they're focused maybe just on the financial aspect of it, but they, I think, miss the bigger picture of all the derivatives, all the other avenues that people can go down, of which you are focused in on one of them. So, with Fleet, could you describe what this is and help people understand a little bit more about how it could benefit them in the long run?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, if you the way I at least think of Fleek, and I think is helpful for other people is, there is the decentralized network, which is just a very edge optimized on-chain cloud platform providing different web services. Um, Things like serverless compute, CDN. There's a lot of different web services you could build on Fleek Network. So if you think of like a smart contract platform, like most of these other protocols, as like a platform for building financial services, like on a smart contract platform, you build things like a lending protocol or application or a trading application or a DEX, things like that. Or on Fleek Network, you would build more web services. So yeah, things like serverless functions or edge functions or a CDN or all sorts of different infrastructure that if you look at any Web3 protocol today, they all use this infrastructure. Everyone needs hosting, everyone's using Lambda functions, everyone's using, all these sorts of just Web2 technologies and infrastructure to augment themselves to make themselves performant. So you could think of Fleek as not really competing against any of these existing Web3 protocols. We're just looking to replace existing parts of their stack that currently run on Web2 infrastructure like Cloudflare, AWS, etc. But with Fleek, we also have like the developer platform. So, if you look at most protocols, like they focus on building the protocol, and then they leave like the sort of productization on top of the protocol and the end user experience of using the protocol to their third party community. Whereas with Fleek, while anyone could build on Fleek Network and build this functionality into any cloud platform or any developer platform or any app, we also provide the Fleek platform, which just makes it pretty much an identical experience to using a traditional cloud platform like an AWS or Vercel. But with the main difference being the infrastructure under the hood is this decentralized on-chain Fleek network infrastructure largely, maybe with, it works very well with other protocols and stuff. So you can use it in combination with whatever you want. So that's where I kind of like to think Fleek, like how like you could think of Uber, where Uber, they do have this decentralized network of drivers. But when you think of Uber, you don't really think of that first and foremost. You just think about it from the customer perspective of what is Uber doing? It's a ride sharing app. It's where you can, get a ride. And so for Fleek, Fleek is really just like an edge optimized, cloud platform with like for developers to build applications. But the innovation similar to Uber or Airbnb or these others who have innovated in different sectors by decentralizing the supply side, we just view that's sort of what we're doing for cloud infrastructure, where we're taking a unique approach at the infrastructure layer, which we think provides very significant performance, cost, and reliability advantages. But we plan to package it in a very familiar experience and developer flow and sort of features and functionalities and a platform experience they're used to. So you don't put up any of these unnecessary barriers to entry with needing wallets or needing, tokens or any of that stuff. So we try to eliminate as many of those barriers as possible. So Fleek sort of is, all of that encompasses all of that kind of similar, to how you could think Uber is the same.
Really well said, because I think ultimately people who are using these applications, the end users, shouldn't notice a difference. It's the developers, the builders on the back end that are actually coordinating these things. They have to figure these types of pieces out, correct?
Well, also the developers themselves, because like if you look at any modern developer trends, like I think there's like 25 million developers in the world today, and that number has doubled in the last 5 years. So if you think of all these younger, newer developers, they don't want to go to AWS and need to get a certification to figure out how to use a platform to deploy a site or an app they want to, deploy or build. They want to go to a modern platform like a Vercel or a Railway or a Render or Netlify and do as little infrastructure DevOps as possible. Just link their GitHub, do minimal to zero configuration, and it just work. And all the SEO benefits, all those performance benefits, they just get sort of out of the box, auto scaling. They don't want to deal with any of these headaches that traditional software developers and, like just I'd say the way things were done in the past, we're moving away. So the same way customers like that Shopify experience of you don't need to know how to code a website to launch an e-commerce store, you just use Shopify. That's largely the same direction web development is going, where you shouldn't need to know all these lower level, infrastructure things if you just want to build a nice web app and have it be super performant. And so we're trying to actually hide all those pieces for the developers so that they can take advantage of this new infrastructure without needing to learn any new tricks or any cognitive overhead or, learning curve. They could just, one click migrate, link their GitHub, deploy it the same way they would on an existing centralized cloud platform, get all the performance, cost, other benefits we offer because of the infrastructure differences, but, package it and present it in a way that doesn't, create any unnecessary friction.
I got you. So you're moving further the no code, low code up the stack, so those developers don't have to worry about it either. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you
Yeah.
going through that.
Because if
So,
you think about it from like the Ethereum smart contract perspective, one of the best advantages of building a decentralized application on something like Ethereum, they take care of all the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about scaling. You don't have to worry about DevOps, maintenance, nothing. You worry about your application logic in that smart contract, and that's it. All you do is worry about updating that application logic to make the product better, but the infrastructure is completely outsourced to Ethereum. So now you could think of Fleek Network as trying to provide that to more web infrastructure, which is like even more valuable, given just how currently it's very hard to just manage and maintain infrastructure.
no, that makes a lot of sense. Out of curiosity, since you've gone down the whole Ethereum route, are you working on layer two, or are you working on straight up on the layer one?
I would say, well, Fleek Network is agnostic. So like the only real usage, like we are an Ethereum sidechain,
Okay.
technically. The main difference between like a sidechain and an L2 is like we ultimately, like Ethereum doesn't have the final say in our state, our own network does. That's the main, I'd say, difference between an L2 and a sidechain. Very sort of nuanced differences. But basically, that's just because in Fleek Network, like all the economic aspects of the protocol, we don't need to handle on our protocol. So we handle that on an Ethereum L2, mainly just because it's cheaper. So the main token might initially launch on Ethereum L1 just because it's easier for a lot of things. But then, like other modern protocols have been doing, you can sort of migrate any governance, if there is any, or any staking, or anything that has to do with payments or the economic aspects of the protocol will live on an L2, and then it's just communicated to our chain. So like all payments are in USDC or other stables, USD stables. So that's so if you want to compare like the price of our web resources to AWS or Cloudflare, another platform, it's very easy, apples to apples. You don't have to do any of these currency conversions with these weird exotic tokens. It's just USD to USD. So, but yes, for those that like you would pay on an L2, we could accept payment on many L2s or chains. That part doesn't matter. Pretty much everyone has native USDC on their protocol now. But then that would just sort of feed into like Fleek Network. But yeah, Fleek Network is its own essentially layer one blockchain, but it's technically an Ethereum sidechain. And yeah, anything economic related to the protocol happens on an Ethereum L2 that we haven't chose yet, but we will soon.
Okay, you actually answered the question I was just about to go down the road of is how does this work? I mean, do you have your own token? You, which gets to be messy when everyone's doing that. But okay, so that makes
We
sense.
do have our own token.
Oh, you
It,
do? Okay.
it has nothing to do with the payment for services offered by the protocol, because I think that's just an unnecessary friction, and I don't think payment tokens are a good token design. So basically, it works much like very similar to like a taxi medallion. Like it's just something you need to become an operator on the network, but it does not touch the end user of the network. So like everyone brings up the Uber example. Like if Uber were to decentralize, they could just pay everyone in Uber tokens. And no, that would never happen because then drivers would never join the network. They would just get paid in their local currency like they do now. And maybe you would treat Uber tokens like you would, in a centralized setting, how they wanted, or Airbnb tried to give them stock. But now with a token, it would just be a lot easier to do it and a lot less regulatory, just red tape around doing things like that, which they've all been stopped from trying to do that in the past. But yeah, it's just a completely supply side thing where these node operators who want to run these edge nodes in the network can just stake at the Fleek tokens and then become operators in the network. That's a very high level summary, but they get paid in USDC. So
Okay.
they just like you have to buy a taxi medallion to become a New York City taxi driver, but then the money you earn from being a taxi driver is just, USD or, credit card payments or whatever. So it's the same thing here. We separate the payment aspect of the network for the services the network provides from this staking token that's needed to become an operator on the network.
Okay, excellent. All right, so quick total aside. I mean, I've been in this space talking about it for better part of 13 years now. And one of the things that I used to use as a classic example when I talk to people to help educate them around decentralization, and of course, when Ethereum came out, that was my primary use case, was talking about that and its blockchain and derivatives therein, was the eventuality of potentially, as you've mentioned several times, Uber or decentralized version of that. How come we haven't seen a version of that yet? Do you think?
There definitely are attempts at it. I know there's a decentralized, I forget the name, but there is a decentralized Uber project on Solana that seems
Okay.
pretty decent. I think the hard part is just figuring out like what do you offer that's better than the current alternatives. And I think it's like, sort of like all these categories, decentralized social, I think decentralized finance hit a real like advantage where you don't have to do any regulatory nonsense. You don't have to worry about your account, being like closed down. You're in control of your funds and, you don't have to ask permission. So I think the permissionlessness of decentralized finance is a huge advantage over the very permissioned centralized financial system. But when it comes to something like decentralized Uber, like, it's Uber does take a significant portion of the fees that the network generates. So I do think there is opportunity for someone to build a more fair system. But I think, yeah, it's very hard because, that's like I do think it'll happen, but I think that's really like for a driver and a rider, it's like when you're building a two-sided marketplace, especially, it's really hard. But yeah, what's your incentive to get people onto your new network as opposed to Uber? And I think what people are going to have to figure out is how to be like an add-on extension rather than a full-on replacement where, you can maybe like there would be no downside to joining the network and just upside. So yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, Uber, from a driver's perspective, like a rider's perspective, they do a phenomenal job in, like most riders, I think, besides maybe prices, are pretty happy. So I think that's really where, for any use case, our use case too. Like I think what most projects and protocols in Web3 struggle with is what is your actual advantage over current existing solutions? If your only advantage is that it's decentralized, then you're going to be, you're not going to have a fun time because I do not think that that is very important to most users in most use cases. Finance, like I said, that's unique. But for most other things, I think, it's a lot more nuanced.
So that's exactly where I was going to go with it, was this idea of how do you or any other organization compete against an AWS? Like, what's your value add to it, so that people are like, oh, this makes sense. I can save money, or it's just easier. What do you tell people that are sort of pitting Fleek versus AWS in this situation against each other? How do they see the benefit?
So largely, well, it comes down to a few different things. So the cost one is easiest, so I'll start there. So if you look at traditional corporate cloud, just the industry, uh, Gartner or one of these large research groups did a study where they said 75 to 80% of IT costs are human attributed things. So management of the infrastructure, just security of the infrastructure, people just maintaining the infrastructure, building the infrastructure. And so if you look at cloud costs, they're very, very elevated, because you kind of have this oligopoly who
Yeah.
controls the web and cloud services right now. And so, yeah, prices, if you use cloud platforms compared to if you just ran your own server in your own home and what you would pay for comparable compute or bandwidth or whatever, it's astronomically high. And then you have these modern platforms that are built on top of these AWS type platforms. So their costs are even higher because they're starting with AWS as their own baseline cost. And so for us, and what we're seeing with other decentralized networks, LivePeer is an example for video transcoding. Pocket Network is an example for like RPC requests. But on average, they're like 80% cheaper than centralized alternatives. Why? Because most centralized alternatives are built on AWS or other cloud platforms, whereas those networks are largely bare metal networks, meaning they just have infrastructure running in data centers or, off cloud platforms. And so the cost then gets much closer to the actual hardware and electricity costs and, maybe the bandwidth costs at the ISP they're using. Like it gets them way closer to the actual cost of providing these services, and you get rid of all that bloat. So if you can do what Uber has done, or you could do what, well, Airbnb to a lesser extent, which is you set up a system, a network, and you run it algorithmically, and you let the incentives of the system pretty much self-govern itself, then yes, you should be able to run it way more efficiently and at a way lower cost than, the 75 to 80% human bloat that's plaguing these cloud platforms. So on the cost side, that's where we think that there's a big advantage, and we've seen it work with other Web3 protocols compared to Web2 alternatives in terms of costs and pricing because of that sort of non-use of cloud platform advantage. But on the performance side too, like you said, edge computing is becoming a big trend because of the latency and just how important speed and load times are to the web and user behavior and what apps they use and how important speed is to those user decisions. But if you look at most modern edge computing and like these Web2 edge sort of platforms, most of them are just sitting on top of AWS data center locations.
Right.
Because similar to Uber, it would be way too economically unfeasible for a centralized company to go set up infrastructure outside of cloud platforms in all these different jurisdictions, have to worry about securing it, have to worry about, yeah, all the regulations and different legal requirements in all these different territories and countries. So they just don't do it. And so most edge computing today is sub 100 locations just sitting on top of different AWS, GCP, Azure data center locations. So we've basically went from one server to 30 servers. That's edge computing in its current state. If you could decentralize the supply side like Uber has for a use case like this, you can actually get to scale that would give you true edge computing. So in a test net, we've already proven we could have several thousand nodes, which is an order of magnitude or two greater than most centralized edge computing platforms. And if you look at most Web3 networks, the topology of them is like an edge network. They've got all these nodes in different geographic locations. However, none of their networks are geo-aware. They all allocate work based off of stake amounts or round robins. So, you might have a request coming in from California, but it's this node in China's turn to do the work. So that's who gets the work. So you'll never reach Web2 scale with a setup like that. So we've kind of just taken a complete opposite approach to architecting a network like this, where all the work is completely allocated based off of a performance-based reputation score and location. So if a user it's like Uber. a driver in in Asia is not getting a request for a rider in California. The drivers in California closest to the user are the ones getting the work. That's the exact same way Fleek Network works. So if you have more nodes in more locations, especially with things like Starlink coming around the world, you're going to see a lot of internet growth in places you don't have traditional internet usage. And those are also the places that these cloud platforms don't have data centers. So in the big cities where cloud platforms have data centers, yeah, maybe our performance is comparable. But in the areas outside those big cities and data centers, we should have a node closer to the end user requesting something on a website. Every time someone requests something on Instagram, every time they scroll that feed, every time they click a new website or hit refresh or scroll Twitter, that's data that's being transmitted from, wherever this application is holding that data. So yes, we think in a lot of circumstances, we will have a node closer to the end user and the data closer to the end user requesting that data, that we should be able to get it and have better performance for use cases like CDN or edge compute or a lot of these different things that make these applications work. And so that should give us better performance than these traditional cloud platforms for a lot of these use cases we're targeting with Fleek Network. On the last
Fantastic. Yeah.
category, just is what we group in just no corporate nonsense. So if you browse Twitter today, every day you'll see something where a user is like, oh, my Vercel bill just went to $100,000 because, I got a lot of traffic on my app, or Cloudflare is threatening to shut down my app because, I owe all this money because I got DDoS attacked. Or with Google, they're deleting some Australian or, like financial companies' complete records and all their infrastructure by accident. So I think the same nonsense you see on social media platforms, the same thing is happening behind the scenes with cloud platforms. There's a lot of, um, influence based on where those cloud platforms are based jurisdictionally, and the government pressure behind the scenes to do things to, censor what they want and stuff. So yes, I think the no corporate nonsense of censorship resistance and permissionlessness and no deplatforming and transparent pricing and open source, I think all those things become more important as the decade goes on. And I think by the end of this decade, it will be weird to build any sort of meaningful software application on corporate controlled cloud infrastructure versus decentralized on-chain permissionless cloud infrastructure. The same way you're seeing BlackRock and these big financial companies wake up to Ethereum and these smart contract chains and platforms being better infrastructure to build financial use cases and applications and infrastructure on versus centralized infrastructure. I think the same thing will happen for cloud, but we are focused on the performance and cost advantages to start, because like I said, if you only focus on that decentralization third bucket, we don't think there's enough there for a use case like cloud infrastructure to convince people to move over or migrate.
You are speaking my language. It's stuff that I've been talking about for forever, and I thought it would happen a little more quickly, but these things take time because they are crazy shifts. So no, it's wonderful. All right, one last quick question, and then I think we have to
Sure.
leave it there. Do you do integrations with IPFS as well as Filecoin?
So we are storage layer agnostic.
Okay.
But within Fleek Network, we do use Blake 3 hashing. So everything in the network is content addressed. Blake 3 hashes are IPFS compatible. So you could any file or data we're accelerating on the CDN, or any edge functions or cloud functions, everything is content addressed. So you could use any Fleek Network usage with IPFS if you wanted to. However, like the agnostic thing is, where we see, I'll do this quickly, but where we see a lot of protocols make mistakes is like they kind of take like the EC2 approach, where they want you to do everything in their protocol. They want you to store here, they want you to compute here. And so that's where we've taken a more modular approach, which is much like how the modern web works, where if you want to store your data on Filecoin or Arweave or S3 or on your own servers, that is completely up to you, and we do not care. It does not impact Fleek Network at all. And that's the way modern most serverless compute, edge compute CDNs work. You just are, origin agnostic, and you let people use and choose whatever they want. So yes, we do work with all of those, but yeah, we work with Web 2, Web 3 storage on, prem storage. All of it is user developer choice.
Excellent. My goodness, Harrison, I really appreciate the time today. It was fantastic to hear about all this stuff.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, and I enjoyed it.
All right, excellent.